Today's lesson is about midpoints. We're going to start with our vocabulary, and the first word is what a midpoint is. A midpoint is a point, and this point is in the exact middle of a line segment. So it cuts it exactly in half. So again, a midpoint is a point in the exact middle of a line segment. Now typically in geometry, we're going to draw diagrams. Sorry about that. We're going to draw diagrams to represent our vocabulary. So the first thing we need to have a midpoint is we must start with a line segment. So we're going to draw ourselves a line segment. We have two endpoints. One is A and one is B. So we're going to go ahead and label those. The midpoint, we're going to label that with the letter M. We're going to put it in the exact middle of the segment. However, we're not going to measure this with a ruler. We are just going to put it in the middle, and then to indicate that it is in the middle, we're going to place a slash in the line segment between A and M. We're going to put a single slash in the line segment between M and B. That is going to indicate to everyone looking at the diagram that M is in the exact middle. So it also says that we need to use words to explain the diagram. So we're going to indicate that M is the midpoint of our segment. Now we have a name for the segment, and we can call the segment by its two endpoints. The endpoints of this segment are A and B. We can also write that using the two endpoint letters with a line segment over top. So either notation works for segment AB. Now we need to talk about the slashes, and the slashes are indicating to us that AM is congruent to MB, and I'm going to say because of the slashes. And that's going to be the way it is in geometry for the remainder of the year. The next vocabulary word is a segment bisector. We're going to have various bisectors in geometry, and today we're only talking about a segment bisector. A segment bisector is a point, a line, a ray, or a plane. And this thing, the point, line, plane, or ray, is going to go through the exact middle. And it's going to go through the middle of a segment again. So the reason these two vocabulary words are together is because where a segment is bisected is called the midpoint. So again, we're going to draw a diagram to represent this. We start with our segment. So I'm going to label this segment, segment AB, and again, the endpoints are labeled A and B. I'm going to go ahead and have my bisector be a line. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to label the line L. And I'm going to now indicate that it goes through the middle by putting a point right where that line crossed my segment. I'm going to go ahead and label that M. And then the last thing I'm going to do is put the slashes on to indicate that AM and MB are the same length. So again, I need to use words to explain this diagram. So I'm going to talk about what I have. I have segment AB. I'm going to label that as AB, the endpoints with a line segment over top, is bisected. And it's bisected by a line, and the line has a name, and the line is called line L. Additionally, I know that M is going to be the midpoint. So M is the midpoint of line segment AB. And again, I'm going to use the notation of the two endpoints with the line segment over top. Lastly, on this page, we're going to talk about the difference between a midpoint and an endpoint. So of course, we're talking about segments. So we know what a midpoint is, and a midpoint is in the middle of a segment. And the key to the midpoint is where it is on the segment, which is in the middle. Let's talk about an endpoint. An endpoint is not in the middle. An endpoint is either the end or the beginning of a segment. Now, in geometry, we will typically draw a diagram to represent anything that we have written in words. So let's go ahead and draw ourselves a diagram explaining where these things are. So again, I'm going to start with a line segment. Let's try some different endpoints this time. So let's call this line segment RS. Now we can actually label what R and S are. These are not midpoints. They are not in the middle. This is an endpoint. I'm just going to put a little cloud around it so I know that's an endpoint. And S is also an endpoint. So again, I'm going to put a little cloud around S to indicate that it's, and I put those in blue. I'm going to go ahead and put my midpoint in red, and it's going to go right in the middle. So here's my midpoint. We typically label the midpoint M. I'm sure you've noticed. And I'm going to go ahead and put a little cloud in there. So again, the midpoint is in the middle between the endpoints, in this case, R and S. So moving on to the next page. Number 4, if 2 points are graphed, find the coordinates of the midpoint. So in the first box, we're going to write down the steps that we are going to follow. So the steps we're going to follow, we're going to look at our graph, and the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to count from point A up and over to point B. So I go to point A, my starting point right here in blue, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to count up till I'm even with B. So B, I'm going to go ahead and dash B over so I know when I need to stop. So I start at A and I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry about that. We are now moving on to what's called try 4. So what you are to do now is you are going to actually work this problem out on your own, and you're going to pause the video while you do it, and when you press play again, the answer and the solution will be up. So go ahead right now and take a few moments and find the coordinates of the midpoint of segment S. Okay, so the answer to you try 4 was the point 0, 2.5. If you got this correct, please just continue with the video. If you did not have this correct, please press pause so that you may go through the steps that are written down and figure out how you can actually get that problem correct. Next, we're moving on to number 5. If 2 coordinates are given, find the coordinates of the midpoint. Same question, except we're no longer starting on a graph. So the difference between this one and the last one is I have no graph. So part A is saying, okay, I want you to stick with that. I don't want you to put them on the graph. So what we need to do is figure out how we're going to do this. If you were to look in a textbook, the midpoint formula looks like this. Which is fine. And if that midpoint formula makes sense to you, then please use that midpoint formula right there. It's similar to the slope formula you learned in Algebra 1. And if that's not what you like, then I'm going to walk through kind of breaking that down for you right now. So without using the graph, step 1 is we have to first identify the x's. So when I look at the x's are the first number in each of the points. So we have 3 and we have -7. So what we're going to do now is we need to find, well, where's the middle between those? So if you remember the middle from previous math courses you've taken, to find the middle, you're actually finding the average. So to average those two numbers, we add them together and divide by 2. So I'm going to take 3 and I'm going to add it to -7, and then I'm going to divide by 2. So at this point, if you've got a calculator, you can pick up your calculator and do that. If you work that out, you get -4 on the top, 2 is on the bottom, and if you divide that out, you end up with a -2. This is going to be the x value. So this is the midpoint, x value is -2. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the y's to find the y value of the midpoint. So step 3 is going to be to find my y's. And my y's again are going to be the second number in my coordinates. So that's going to be 7 and -1. Next, I'm going to find the middle or the average. So that's going to be 7 plus -1 divided by 2, which is 6 divided by 2, which is 3. And that is the y value. So the y value is 3. At this point, I can write my points down over here. And I'm going to use both of these. I'm going to have parentheses because it's a point. I'm going to have a comma in between. My x value of my midpoint was -2, and the y value of my midpoint was +3. Whether you're on a graph or not, you're welcome to use that method anytime. Additionally, we could do the same problem by using a graph. We're going to go through the exact same steps that we did before. We just need to start by labeling our points on the graph. The first thing that we need to do is plot the points on the graph. And then we're going to do the exact same thing we did in number 4. So the first point A is at 3, 7. So starting at the origin, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is A, and I'm going to go ahead and label it with its coordinates, 3, 7. We also have point B, which is at -7, -1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, -1. So here's B. Again, I'm going to label it with -7, -1. So from here, again, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now before I always had a segment, so if that makes you happy, go ahead and draw the segment in. And we can go ahead and draw in the segment. My lines aren't going to be straight. Pretty good. So from here, we're going to follow the same steps that we did before, and this is when we counted up and over. And we're going to go ahead and start from B to A. So starting at B, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, I'm going to go ahead and label that. And then I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm going to label that. So I'm going to write that down over here. I went up 8 and I went over 10. So at this point, to find the midpoint, I want to do half. So I'm going to go from B again. And I want to go up and over half, which is going to be, in our case, up 4 and over 5. So starting at B, I'm going to go up 4 and over 5 and put a point right there. And that I'm going to label with an M. Again, from this place, I'm going to start at the origin, and I am going to label that point, which is left 2 and up 1, 2, 3. So my last step is, after I plot that point, from the origin, find the coordinates. And hopefully this is what we got earlier. Let's go back and look. And it is. We got -2, 3 as coordinates of the midpoint. At this point, what I'd like you to do is you try 5, and you may use whichever method you're most comfortable with. It doesn't matter to me at all. What you do need to pay attention to is our grid that you have has no x-axis and it has no y-axis. So you are going to need to put those in when you do those. So right now, please pause the video, and when you have gotten the problem finished, go ahead and play the video to see if you got your answer correct. Okay, so the answer to you try 5 is 1/2, comma, -5. If you did not get this correct, you need to pause the video here and see if you can figure out where you went wrong so that you can fix your mistake. If you did get this right, then please continue with the video. We're now on number 6. This one's a little bit different. If a point and the midpoint are graphed, find the coordinates of the other end point and explain the steps. So what we need to realize is that we no longer are trying to find the middle of a segment. We've been given the middle of the segment. And it tells me in the problem right here, I'm asked to find the steps to find the endpoint E of CE with midpoint D. So right now we know that D is the midpoint. That's the middle of the segment, which means what we actually are trying to do is we're going to come down here somewhere, and I don't know where, but somewhere to be the other end point. If I go back to the directions and I look at the segment CE, it tells me that I'm trying to find endpoint E. So this is basically what I'm trying to find, is where is this E located? And I can do this precisely. What I've drawn so far is just to give us an idea of where we're going. I'll go ahead and erase that. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the same counting technique that we did when we did find the midpoint. So the first step is going to be that we're going to start at the endpoint. In this case, our endpoint that we were given graphically was C. And from here, we're going to count down and over until we get to the middle. And again, the midpoint in this case is D. So I'm going to start this time with C. I'm going to count down till I'm even with D. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to label that with a 3. I'm going to then count over till I'm even with D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if D is exactly in the middle, if I repeat that over again, starting at D, that will locate the other endpoint C for me. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. From the midpoint, which in our case is D, repeat down 3 over 7 to find the endpoint. So now I'm starting at D, the middle. I'm going to go down 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to go over 7. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. And that is going to be my other endpoint, E, so that D is the midpoint of segment CE. So all I did there was I plot and I label the endpoint. And in this case, we were trying to find endpoint E. And finally, I do need to actually write down the coordinates from the origin. So I come back over. I need to find these coordinates. Again, I'm starting at the origin. And I'm going to the right, 8, and I'm going down 5. So the coordinates are to the right, 8, which is positive, and then I went negative. So the coordinates are 8, comma, -5. At this point, you have a UI based on that problem. So again, what I'd like you to do is pause the video, actually work out this problem, and when you're finished, start the video again and see if your answer is correct. So the endpoint J is at 5, comma, -2. Again, if you got that correct, continue with the video. If that was not correct, please pause and take a look at the graph to determine what it is you did and what you need to do in the future. We're now on number 7. So for number 7, we're doing the same thing we just did. Coordinates of a point and a midpoint are given. Find the coordinates of the other endpoint. However, if you look at this one, I have no graph given to me. So actually, let me scroll down. I have no graph given to me. So we need to deal with this without a graph. On the next page, we're actually going to deal with it with a graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into x's and y's. So I'm going to start by looking at the x values. So I start by identifying the x values of the endpoint and which is the endpoint. When I'm looking at these, either C or E, one of these is going to be the endpoint because the midpoint is D. So this is my endpoint. And again, the x value is 3. And then I need to find the midpoint x value. And again, they told me the midpoint was D, so my midpoint is right here, and that is the x value, which is -7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot these on a number line. And I'm going to plot them very specifically. I'm going to start by plotting the midpoint, because the midpoint has to be in the exact middle of my segment. And again, I'm just on a number line. I'm not on a coordinate plane. So I don't need to write all the numbers involved. I don't need them. It's not going to help me. I'm going to draw a number line. I'm going to put an X next to it so I know that I'm dealing with the X values right now. So I'm going to start by putting the midpoint right in the middle. And I'm going to label that with M. In this case, what's my midpoint called? My midpoint is called D. So I'll put a little mid right there, and it's point D. And that X value is -7. So that's got to be the middle of my segment. I need to place this endpoint on my graph, and my endpoint's at +3. So if I were to go in this direction, I would be going -8, -9, -10, etc. But if I were going to the right, I would be at -6, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my positives actually are going to end up on the right side. I don't need to have all those numbers written down. I just need to know whether I need to be on the right side of the midpoint or the left side of the midpoint. So I've established I need to be on the right side of the midpoint. So on my number line, I'm going to place the 3 to the right of the -7. So it doesn't matter where I put it. I just like to leave a little space so that I can write. This is my endpoint. My endpoint is called C. So basically what I'm trying to find, well, where is this over here? That's going to be the x value of the other endpoint. In order to find this, I need to figure out, well, how far away is -7 from +3? What's the distance between -7 and +3? And that distance to get to 0, from -7 to get to 0 is 7. And then I need to go an additional 3, which makes the distance between -7 and +3 is 10. Now, I need to now go in the opposite direction from my midpoint, and I need to go away 10. So if I go to the left from -7, 10 units, that's going to put me at -17. This is going to be the x value for my endpoint, which is called E. So once I find this distance, I need to add the distance to the midpoint in the opposite direction. And doing that assures me that D is exactly in the middle of my segment. We're going to repeat this process now with the y values. So I'm going to start by finding the y value of the endpoint. I'd scroll back up to find that. Again, the endpoint I have in green, and the y value is -5. and my endpoint was called C, and it's at -5. And then the midpoint, that one is called D, and scroll back up, the Y value is -1. So I'm going to be putting these on a number line now, and I'm going to again start by plotting the midpoint. Draw myself a number line. Again, the midpoint needs to go first. The midpoint, and again, is point D, and it's at this time at -1. C, my other endpoint's at -5. So the question is, am I going to go to the left of -1, or am I going to go from the right of -1? And -5 is smaller than -1, so I'm actually going to the left. So I'm going to go to the left. -5 is going to be point C, and that's my endpoint. And again, I then am looking for the Y value to be over here somewhere. So I need to find out how far away is -5 from -1. And you can count that on the number line. You can use your calculator, but that distance is 4. So from the midpoint, I need to go away 4 units again. And where does that put me? If I go away 4 units from -1, that is going to put me at +3. And that's going to be my endpoint, which is called E. So what I did was I find the distance from the midpoint D to endpoint C, and then go away in the opposite direction from D, same amount. Now the final thing that I need is coordinates. And this, of course, is the endpoint E. I have an X value. Right now I can't see the X value. I can see the Y value, and the Y value is 3 up. And I found the X value to be -17. So endpoint E is at -17, +3. I'm now going to scroll all the way back up to put it in the answer box. Again, -17, 3 is where that endpoint is. Going on to the next page. We're doing the exact same thing, except what we're going to do is the graph. So we're going to do this the way we did the first one, except we have to plot the points first. Now on this graph, we do not have x-axis or y-axis, but I need to place them carefully. What I know is I have a midpoint. This is my midpoint. The midpoint is at D. So I need to make sure that that is approximately in the middle of the grid. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to estimate I might go off the graph somewhere, which is okay. We can deal with that. I'm going to estimate the middle to be about here. And I'm going to go ahead and label that as D, my midpoint. And the coordinates of that are at -7, -1. So what I need to do is to kind of work backwards, and now I need to find the origin. So with the X coordinate told me I moved left 7 units. So to go from D to the origin, I need to go right 2, 5, 6, 7. I also know from the Y value that to get to D, I went down 1, which means to get to the origin, to undo that, I would need to go up 1. So I'm going to think that the origin is right here. And let's go ahead and see if that works for point D. I would then go to the left 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, down 1, and I land on D. So I like my origin. I'm going to draw in my y-axis, And that way I can deal with all the other points. So I've plotted my midpoint. So that's my first step. Plot the midpoint. And I want to plot the midpoint in the middle-ish of the grid. And then what I did was I went towards the directions in its origin. So I sort of undid that point, -7, -1. So from D, I went right 7 and up 1. From there, I plotted the origin and then I drew in the X. What I'm going to do now is I need to plot the other endpoint. I was given that, so I'm going to plot the other endpoint. And this endpoint is called C, and it's at 3, -5. So from the origin, I'm going to go 3, -5. And so here's my C. So what I need to do now is I need to do my counting up and over technique so that I can find where I need to go from D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count from the endpoint to the midpoint, and then from the midpoint, repeat that. So from C, I'm going to count up 4, and I'm going to count over 10. From D, which is the middle, I'm going to repeat that. So I'm going to count up 4 again, and I'm going to count over 10. And I went off my grid by 1, which is okay. I can adjust for that. I'm going to go ahead and label that as E. That is my endpoint. And now from the origin, I need to label this point. So that is the last step. Find the coordinates from the origin. So starting at the origin, I'm going to go left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and up 3. So I went left 17 and up 3. Now, where yours fell off the graph may have been a different spot, and you just need to know how many places off the graph you went, and remember that when you go to write down the coordinates of point E. Again, I'm going to write the coordinates up in the answer box, and that was at -17, 3. Finally, we have one more problem for you to try. 7, and again, you're doing the same thing. You're welcome to use the graph or not use the graph, whichever method you like. And when you're finished, go ahead and hit pause, and then when you're finished, press play and see if your answer is correct. So the endpoints C are at -8, 9. Again, if you got that correct, you're finished with the video. You have finished your first video lesson. If for you, you need to pause the video and see what you can do to correct it.